So what happens is in therapy, the healing or in coaching, or if you can do self-therapy on yourself, right? Healing involves uncovering the situations first uncovering the situations that caused the original perceived trauma and pain. So the true self, assuming that you've got your true self online, asks the inner child to reveal the memory or image of what happened when it was young in order to cause the inner child to feel so bad about itself. So here are some examples of things that could trigger your inner child and cause deep pain that you hold on to and repress, and that therefore sabotage everything down the line. So one is, so some examples I'll give you of how your inner child could be exiled. Judgment. So if you were judged harshly or frequently by parents, family members, or other key figures in your childhood, a child part of you that started out innocent and whole could end up feeling wrong, bad, inadequate, or worthless, especially if this judgment was accompanied by anger, yelling, or abuse. Okay, so judgment. Another example could be shame. Being shamed or ridiculed by parents, teachers, peers, repeatedly or harshly would prompt an inner critic self to come out, an inner critic part, to shame your child self. And this is actually an attempt to protect you from doing again whatever led to being shamed in the first place. Children also tend to take on the shame of their parents as their own. So you might see this in a kid that has been scolded, and you might find that kid repeating that same scolding phrase to itself, on its own, which is freaky, like, oh, geez, that's shame. That's the toxicity of shame. Or it could be punishment as control. So when children do dangerous things, parents may overreact and punish the child. Maybe when you darted toward the streets, your parents not only grabbed your arm and scolded you, but also spanked you and said that you were bad. Or maybe you hit another kid or took another kid's toys. This is common among young boys as they're growing up, learning boundaries. And your parents, they should teach you not to do such things, of course. But if they yelled, "Stop that, you are bad," and internalized the shame as a form of punishment, this harshness would make your child self feel bad about having natural impulses. And this would activate an inner critic part in that child that undermines or guilt trips the child and uses the same harsh approach that the child's parents did. So this all gets internalized. Okay, so especially when you're a very young child and your brain is still forming, it's a natural thing to learn through mirroring or modeling what you see in the adults, caretakers, and that's what will happen even when it comes to, or especially when it comes to shame and punishment and things like this. Another source could be rejection or abuse. If your caregivers didn't want you, or if they abused you, your child self would end up feeling as if it didn't have the right to exist, or that it was dangerous to exist. This would create an inner critic part that blames you for the abuse in a bid to protect you from fighting back and being harmed even more. So again, even all of these inner critic parts, all of their positive intents are around protection. And the inner critic could protect you from fighting back and being harmed even more, or by being abandoned entirely by the caregiver. So it blames you to give you the illusion of being able to control and change the situation. Because if you think, if I did it, then maybe I can fix myself and stop it, versus I'm completely helpless now, or fighting back, in which case you're actually inviting further abuse. So the inner critic is trying to protect you by saying, it's your fault, you can do something about it. And guilt is another source of trauma and toxic pain. If your parents used guilt to control you, this would have activated an inner critic part who guilt trips you to stop you from doing the bad things that force you to caretake your parents. Maybe your parents scolded you as a bad person for wanting attention or for wanting gifts, which are normal for a child, or they acted like martyrs and made it your responsibility to take care of their pain and make them feel good. These are ways that guilt are used to create an inner critic, or these are ways that guilt creates an inner critic part. Another source of an inner critic part that creates the pain in the inner child is diminishment. If you were judged or ridiculed whenever you were strong, visible, or capable, this would wound your child's self. It would also then activate an inner critic self, or an inner critic part, to undermine you in a bid to protect you from further criticism. Your parents might have said, "Who do you think you are?" when you were, strong, visible, capable, and then you shrink. The intensity of an inner critic's attacks will often be proportional to the degree of wounding of the criticized child. So the more pain the inner child felt, the stronger and more aggressive the inner critic is that is created as a result to protect the criticized child. And the protection happens by, if you do the shaming, then the adult won't need to do that anymore.